What is up, everyone? Welcome back to a brand new video. You know what? I am a big fan of Dead Island, and I played the first one, and I played Riptide. I avoided Escape just because I wasn't interested, nothing personal against that one and the fans of it. But one game I have been really looking forward to in the franchise is Dead Island 2. Where is Dead Island 2? They teamed up with Jaeger after TechClan left, and they made this build that came out. And that's pretty much all we saw of Dead Island 2. We didn't really see much of it other than that. Until some mad lad, I don't know who, uploaded a leaked build of Jaeger's Dead Island 2 all the way back from 2015. So upon hearing this news, which was like a couple weeks ago, I scoured the internet for this build. I wanted to play this build. I don't really know if it's allowed, but quickly I would find out that it wasn't gonna be easy. No, this was actually a very complicated task, and I'm not gonna give away how I did it because I don't want to get in trouble or anything like that, even though I don't think what I did was really that bad. But they tried to take all the available links of Dead Island 2 off of the internet. But what they don't know is that what's on the internet stays on the internet, and you can truly never get rid of just anything. So with enough time and patience, and I'm talking it was a lot of time and patience, I was able to get the build of Dead Island 2, and I was so hyped for it. I actually called up my buddy, told him about it, and we just had a fucking field day with it. It was great. I had him all set up to where he could watch me play. It was cool to see all the new ideas that they had for it, the new location, the zombies. There's like new zombies, like a slobber zombie that explodes after dying. And I'm showing footage right now of the game. It looks great. Like, I personally think that this game looks great, and it was supposed to come out for Xbox One and PS4 kind of like early on in its life cycle, and yeah, it looks like an early Xbox One PS4 game, and it looks great. Now obviously there are some textures missing. You'll notice in this footage that I'm going around a lot, and there's a lot of just green flat textures or unloaded assets and stuff like that. Well, it is still an incomplete build, but it was mostly just to give you a taste of what Dead Island 2 was going to be about, since I believe the original demo that they showed off at E3 had only 10 minutes on it. In this build, you can pick between 3 locations, and I think the other 2 are just some small little locations, while the main focus is the California setting. So I don't really have footage for the other 2, but there are 3 locations in total that this build allows. I had a blast just walking around the California place. You could definitely see where the game is unfinished. The zombies, they are definitely unfinished. They are unbalanced. Like, either sometimes they won't attack you, or sometimes they'll be right up on you, and infinitely they just keep spawning. And sometimes after killing them, they would just glitch and just panic, or if you run into a spawn area, they'd be glitching trying to find their loading spot. And sometimes when you find them, you'll see the zombies just fidget around. It's quite amusing, actually. Another thing that's actually noticeable about this is that the NPCs are like this blue color. You'll find NPCs that have like main quest NPC or side quest NPC. They'll be like written on their chest somewhere. This is pretty funny just to see these blue guys stand around and talk to you. When people saw the gameplay though at E3, they were, a part I don't understand is that they were a bit disappointed that it looked more of the same and cartoony. I personally don't think that's a bad approach for Dead Island 2. More of the same isn't bad, first of all, as long as it's expanded upon, which Dead Island 2 looked like it was expanding upon pretty greatly. All I really wanted was a fun zombie survival game in paradise that I knew Dead Island 2 was promising, and it looked like they deliver. I played this build for probably a good 7 hours, just exploring the nooks and crannies of the game, trying to break it even further, get into locations I want supposed to be in. It's a lot of fun, and it really takes me back to when I played the first one and how excited I was for when they announced the second one all those years ago. Dinosaur Planet, an early build of Dinosaur Planet, has finally been discovered, and holy crap, this is pretty exciting. Now, if you don't know what Dinosaur Planet is, I'll briefly go over it. Rare was working on a game called Dinosaur Planet for the N64, and it got a lot of good press around it and good attention, so much so that even Shigeru Miyamoto took interest in it, stating that the main characters, both Crystal and Saber, the 2 characters in Dinosaur Planet, resembled Star Fox, and they wanted to add Star Fox into the game. Well, one thing led to another, and Dinosaur Planet just quickly became a Star Fox game, and the game of Star Fox that it turned into is the GameCube game Star Fox Adventures. So with that backstory out of the way, we finally got an early build of Dinosaur Planet, the game Star Fox Adventure was originally going to be, and this is so cool. Not only is it cool because it's the original concept of Star Fox Adventures, Dinosaur Planet, but it's also cool just to see an N64 game, new, I put that in quote, N64 game, surfacing in 2021. Now, I feel like I talked about some stuff in the Dead Island 2 build. I feel like I'm just gonna tell you my experiences with the Dinosaur Planet build. I have been playing it. I've played the build like 4 or 5 times, and for reasons I'll get into in a bit. But I figured we'll just go through it. Before we go, I want to know that the emulator I did this on is pretty trash. So you're going to see some missing textures and, you know, just some things that don't look right in the build. That is not the game's fault. That is me, and that is an emulator problem on my side. So, yeah. Well, starting this beta build out, you got this, you know, the opening credits where they show you all the copyright stuff, and that's, you know, really standard for games. And then you can make your own profile, which is cool, and you see there was 3 profiles in here, so I made my own. Well, after you select your name, the game jumps you into a cutscene, and at this point, the beta build is pretty much the same as the original Star Fox Adventures, with you riding your pterodactyl, fighting the ship. In Star Fox Adventures, obviously, it's more fleshed out, but here is, I like this a little bit more. And just like in Star Fox Adventures, after you defeat the ship, you actually land on top of the ship. But unlike that game, this is actually where you have your first enemy encounter, because as soon as you land on the ship, you fight an enemy. Which is nice because it teaches you the combat controls right off the rip. So this is the part where in Star Fox Adventures, right after you land on a ship, you would have to go downstairs and find the key. Well, however, in this game, you can just run straight over to the bird, because you actually don't get to have that part to where you can find the key to unlock it. The N64 build surprisingly has voice acting, and good voice acting at that, while passable for the time.
General Scale, ruler, tyrant, and dictator of the Sharpclaw tribe. And who might you be, animal girl?
My name is Crystal, and I've come for the princess.
You seem a long way from home, Crystal. I can't believe the wizard asked a girl to do his dirty work.
While Star Fox Adventures just went for this garble, let's make up a language thing.
General Scales, Hiko, Kohud, Otaskuki, Eve Dinosaur Planet. Ud Neokraju, Ui Kimo Nekt.
Am dek kutsoho keivorik oi. Am edko kutsoho rosvejo evu tashkov zuk.
Utashkov Suk? Kiash Niko Koduk, Ash Atashkov.
It's also here where I want to say is that, wow, this game looks really good. And when I mean that, I mean it looks good for the N64. However, with that said, I also think it should be on N64, because I think the graphics support it aesthetically way better than the GameCube did. So far at this point, you know, Star Fox Adventures has did a really good job replicating the old build, except for the fleshing out the ship part. However, after the ship part, it gets into it completely original stuff. After another cutscene and the ship lands, you get to explore this one small little dungeon area, and it is a good first dungeon to get you familiar with the controls, get you familiar with how to use them and stuff like that. I like how it's set up, and I like how it's designed. I also love how when you walk down the stairs, you just see dead dinosaurs and you're talking to one, and then the dude just dies right in front of you mid-conversation. It's pretty grim for an N64 game, I ain't gonna lie. The puzzles in there are pretty okay too. They're pretty much baby's puzzles, you know, first dungeon puzzles to get you all set up and ready to go. But after you do this, you meet up with this thing called a swap stone, and he pretty much explains that how 2 character stories are going on at the same time. So Crystal goes up into it, and then it swaps you over to Saber. However, Saber is Fox McCloud.
Hey, Scaleface, pick on someone your own size. What? Who's that? I am Fox McCloud, Royal Knight of the Lilat system.
So it also really got me thinking, how late into development was this build, because it still had Fox instead of Saber, although the voice acting still said Saber and all. Saber's HUD is still there, complete intact. Also, it's at this point where I gotta mention is that this game is not stable at all, at least not on my emulator. I had this game crash on me on 3 separate occasions, and my god, let me say this, if you're actually trying to play this build and you're trying to save in a specific area, you save now. I can't tell you how many times I've forgot to save because I didn't expect the game to just suddenly crash on me, and I've had to go through the entire cutscenes all over again, the ship boss fight, Crystal's first dungeon, and all 3 cutscenes you have to go to before you get, no, 4 cutscenes that you have to go to before you can actually get to play as Fox. It's crazy, but when you actually get the Fox's part, you can actually see where Star Fox Adventures takes a lot of concept design from this build, and that makes perfect sense. I don't know how much longer the build goes on. I actually got stuck in the Fox part, so I kind of just gave up. And I've looked up online, and it says people have only were showing the first 50 minutes, even though people have made past my point. I don't know how long the build is, but it's just even fantastic and amazing that we have this to begin with. Spider-Man 4. The tragedy of Spider-Man 4 is oh so known around the world to a bunch of Spider-Man fans. And you're looking at one. I was a big fan of the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies back when they were coming out. I loved the first one, I loved the second one, and yes, I even loved the third one. I really loved those characters. I loved Tobey Maguire and I loved Christian Dunst, and I wanted to see more of them after Spider-Man 3. But then after Spider-Man 3, we got The Amazing Spider-Man, which I'll say I liked as another Spider-Man film, but I wanted more from the characters from the other Spider-Man movies, not the reboot. I loved Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man over Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and I loved Gwen Stacy as a character over Mary Jane, but I wanted a continuation of the Sam Raimi films instead of a reboot. I'm sure a lot of other fans did as well. But at the time that all this was happening, I mean, I was a kid. I couldn't really do much about it or look much into it since I didn't really have the resources. So I kind of thought that this was just it. Spider-Man 3 was the end and that there was nothing else after that. But that's the funny part about growing up, because once you become an adult, you can do this thing I like to call research, or scour Google, and you could find out, just like me, that there was a Spider-Man 4. Yes, there actually was gonna be a 4th Spider-Man movie that was gonna come out in 2011, but it was canceled in early 2010. Now, knowing that there was a Spider-Man 4, I tried to look up anything I possibly could on Spider-Man 4, and I found a couple interviews by Tobey Maguire that briefly discussed Spider-Man 4.
You know, everybody's intention is to get it out for 2011.
And there's obviously these storyboards floating around that were very popular, like the Mysterio one, and some Vulture storyboards where they leaned toward that he was going to be the main villain of the movie. However, though, for the Sam Raimi fans out there, Spider-Man 4 does live on in some small way. In 2019, a Wii build of Spider-Man 4 was found. It was shown off on the Hard for Games channel, and they showed off everything that the build had to offer. So I really recommend going down there and watching that video. I'll have a link in the description. However, though, I got my hands on the build, you know, because your boy just be doing that in these type of videos. And while playing this, it is very clear that it is just an early build just to show off what the game was going to be, which makes sense because the build didn't really get much work done on it. Eurocom is actually the one that worked on this build. Like I said, you can definitely tell that this is a very early build with the backgrounds in the city being all gray and stuff. However, though, I am a bit surprised to see that there are a lot of NPCs and cars down on the main road. Even though they might just be copy and pasted of the same assets, it is still pretty cool to see how fleshed out that New York City was going to be with all of its people. This build only allows you to play 2 gameplay areas, and they're both set on a certain path. The game is very linear. It has a certain way it wants you to go, and I can only imagine the game early levels were going to be set up on this linear path and then kind of break out into more expansive rooms. However, we will never know because the game didn't come out, but from what I gather, it seems like that's what they were leading up to. If you haven't noticed already, but in the build there are these red markers that turn green when Spider-Man gets close to them. These allow Spider-Man to swing on them and get to place. They're all set up in a certain path, like I said, kind of going back to that whole linear design thing. And I'm only assuming they did this because they wanted you to go on this exact path that they wanted to put you on. After the first swinging segment, you're dropped right into combat, and apparently there's combat in this, but since I emulated it on a PC, I really couldn't get the combat to work, so my only theory is that the combat is in the Wiimote itself when you shake it to do fighting. I don't know. Hard for Games got the combat to work. I don't know. There are a handful of sections in this game where they will just drop a bunch of enemies on you for you to fight to kind of spruce up the gameplay a little bit. Thankfully, these are avoidable since I can walk right past them and continue the build, otherwise I wouldn't be getting very far. I have to actually point out to say that the Spider-Man model that you use in the game isn't bad at all. It's actually very nice textured and detailed, and while a bit rough, his animations aren't bad either. Unfortunately, there's not much to this build. There's only 2 levels. Well, I mean, there's a ton of debug options, but I have to go on the record and say right now that I am way inexperienced with dealing with all that, and I'm sure there are videos out there that go into the debug options a bit more better than I could ever accomplish in any one of my videos. So I'm not going to dive into all the debugs. I'm assuming this build was being worked on in 2009 because the build actually has a date on it stated for January 2010, roughly the same month that Spider-Man 4 got canceled. Also on the title screen, if you haven't noticed, you'll see newspaper clippings, and we can kind of use these to piece together a bit of a story and kind of speculate what's going on in Spider-Man 4. Playing this build was kind of fulfilling in a way. To actually deal with something that was Spider-Man 4 related is awesome. Now normally, after talking about the build, this is where I'd end the episode. However, within just this week, an Xbox 360 build of Spider-Man 4 has been found. Now, your boy wasn't lucky enough to get this one, but we thank Obscure Gamers for the footage that we have here, and yeah, it looks pretty dope. It kind of looks like the Spider-Man games before it, you know, Spider-Man 2 and 3 more specifically. And if Spider-Man's moves in the city kind of looks a little similar, that's because we have Radical Entertainment to thank for this, and they're the creators of Prototype. And yeah, it is very clear that this Spider-Man build carries a lot from their Prototype with the jumping, the scale of his jumps, and stuff like that. And I want to say, if both of these builds would have actually became real games, there could be genuinely some fun here. Just playing through Spider-Man 4 on the Wii, I still could sense that there was a fun game that could have been here. I mean, sure, it wouldn't have been any masterpiece, but I can guarantee you a lot of people would have fond memories with Spider-Man 4 on Wii, and this 360 build from what I can see. I mean, I like the part where he could take down a helicopter with his webs. I mean, that looks pretty cool, and I think that would have been pretty fun. So, another thing I'd also like to point out is I didn't really see any footage or anything on it, but there have been known PS3 builds out there that are a bit more developed than this Xbox 360 build. And it's said that that PS3 build of Spider-Man 4, once it got canceled, became Prototype 2. Chances are, if you're a Star Wars fan, then you definitely played the Battlefront franchise. The Battlefront franchise is beloved by many Star Wars fans, and including yours truly. Battlefront 1, a great game and a great start to a franchise. Then Battlefront 2 came out and completely improved upon everything Battlefront 1 had to offer. Side note real quick, this is a fucking masterpiece! But after Battlefront 2, I and the rest of the Rebel Alliance were patiently waiting for Battlefront 3. But after 2 years of waiting, in October 2007, we finally got Star Wars Battlefront Renegade Squadron. Okay. I mean, okay, yeah, sure. I mean, fine. This will do. But next is Battlefront 3. And then 2 more years go by. Now it's finally happening. In 2009, in November, we got Star Wars Battlefront Elite Squadron. So, Battlefront 3? Well, no, unfortunately. I read somewhere that Battlefront 3 was supposed to come out in October 2008, and then a whole year later almost, we got Elite Squadron. Battlefront 3 was canceled. Elite Squadron only came out a year after Battlefront 3 was canceled, and if you compare them, you can actually see that Elite Squadron borrows a lot from what Battlefront 3 was going to be. Now, I know a lot of you might be thinking, well shit, there it is, Battlefront 3, it was just on this obscure PSP game I've never heard about. And first thing, wow, I was really rude, you really shouldn't cut me off, I was obviously getting to it. 2, no, Elite Squadron does do its own thing, and while they do share similarities between each other, Elite Squadron is its own game. So there it was. The light began to dim on getting Battlefront 3. We have lost hope. The rebels have lost. And we would never get to play what was going to be the greatest. However, and I don't know how this went under my radar because I would have been all over this shit as soon as I found out, Someone on Reddit in 2016 posted an early build of Battlefront 3. Yeah, so apparently an early build of Battlefront 3 was just chilling on some Xbox 360 dev kit, and it wasn't until now we're just finally hearing about it in 2016, I guess I should say, because now it's 2022, it's way old news now. And while booting this up, you can definitely tell it's an early build. Now, one thing I did want to mention before going more into this is that if you actually do own an Xbox dev kit, you fucking lucky bastard, this game actually runs decently from what I've read anyway. I have to use Xenia, and while I don't like Xenia, it actually did manage to run this with no issues, so I was able to play it, and Xenia is the reason why it is bugging out the way it is. So I wanted to state that out first. If you have a dev kit, you're good. But holy shit, I cannot tell you how excited and amazing it was to finally play this game. Yes, even in the state it's in. I mean, it is just horrible. The frame rate constantly drops, making it hard to do, well, anything in this game. The graphics are constantly glitching out, and it would crash constantly on me. Ah, would you look at that? I mean, it's an early build. I expected all of this crashing to happen on me, all the glitches, everything. But that didn't take away from the fun that I had finally playing Battlefront 3. And if we ignore all the bugs, what is actually here is pretty damn impressive for the time. One of my favorite modes from Battlefront 2 was the Heroes vs. Villains mode, aka Assault. So obviously that was the first mode I decided to jump into. I'm impressed with how many characters there are to play as, and I'm sure this was going to be fixed by the time it came out, but it doesn't seem to matter what era you pick, it all has the same players from both eras. To my knowledge, every class of character acts the same. Like, for example, the Jedis all function the same. They all have just this common 1-2 swing they have to attack. I figured that like Darth Maul would have his swinging lightsaber attack from Battlefront 2, but no, it's all just the same 1-2 swing, and I'm not really surprised because this game really didn't get that much far into development on this part. They also have Jedi powers, like using the Force and saber throws, like in Battlefront 2, but I couldn't figure out how to use any of these. Also, they can jump like super high in this, like way higher than Battlefront 2. And that got me thinking, wow, these Jedis would have practically been fucking broken. The shooter characters have a variety of weapons between the characters that you can pick. They all can throw grenades. Jango Fett has a jetpack, and that's awesome. You can fly like really high and really far with Jango Fett's jetpack. It's kind of fun to abuse, I'm not gonna lie. I think the shooting feels good, but the animation is like way broken, so it doesn't even like correspond well. The running feels faster in this game too, I did notice. I don't know if that's because it was gonna be on the next gen hardware or not, but it definitely does feel faster paced in Battlefront 3. Now, besides the fun multiplayer modes, there are also two other things that really intrigued me about this. The story mode and the split-screen multiplayer. Now, as crazy as this is, the story mode to this game and its cutscenes are still technically here in the game. I discovered early on that there's a gallery that you can go to where you can watch all the cutscenes. I even loaded into the first mission one time by accident from the first gallery mission. But it was through here that I realized that, yeah, these cutscenes are all here. They're silent with some Star Wars music played over it, so I'm sorry I can't really play you the music. But it is interesting that the choreography between these capes, I guess, is all still here, so you can kind of piece together at least a little bit of what was going on. But the story mode kind of works. I was able to play the first mission. I got stuck very early on it, but I was able to watch the cutscene, then load into the first mission of Battlefront 3. I haven't tried that with any other chapters in the game yet. The game kept crashing. It is very unstable, but I'm sure that the rest is out there. What I want to do is compile all these cutscenes and like upload it to my second channel. Yeah, quick plug. I think that would be really neat. We can preserve Battlefront 3 more in this way. I have seen a couple videos on it, but I haven't really seen much in the preservation of it. So obviously diving into the story mode was a real cool part of this. It was kind of cool to see what the story was going to be through my own interpretation, but like I said, they're just capes fighting each other. Or in this one case where a cape is just walking around a town with Star Wars music playing and there's like no one in the town. I don't know what you can get from that one, but hey, piece it together yourself. But the split screen multiplayer is what I was dying to try out. I asked my brother if he would try it with me, and guys, you're not even gonna believe this, but the split screen multiplayer works. It actually fucking works. Sure, it's just as buggy as the rest of the build has been, but it's amazing the fact that split screen is even running on this early build. We decided to hop into the conquest mode. Now, it was the same as, Battlefront 2 where you go and capture bases, but it was still, unfinished, so you couldn't really capture bases. All you could do is just go around and shoot. Which, we did, and we had a lot of fun. We were even able to try to attempt to get into the ships and fly to far out locations, but to no avail, and we would just die. Big part of Battlefront 3's multiplayer was that it was supposed to have land and space combat at the exact same time. So for example, you could start on the ground on a game in Battlefront 3, run to a ship, fly up to space and take the fight up there and land in like the carriers or whatever and shoot all the Empire or whatever you got going on in that game. It was supposed to be really ambitious. For the most part, it's just you spawning in as a random stormtrooper or a Rebel Alliance guy and killing the enemy. And while that's fun in its own right, it does get a little boring. However, it is cool that you are still fully able to run around these maps. Hell, one time in Hoth, we even loaded in and the map loaded in perfectly. Well, at least a little bit better than the rest of the game looked like. It almost looked like Hoth was worked on the most. It seems to me that the majority of Battlefront 3 was done. All it needed was bug work, testing, and some polishing, and it would have been there. If it's at all possible, I would really like if hackers or programmers or whatever would hop on this and try to dig through the files and clean it up a bit. At least the multiplayer. Do it. It's for the greater good. It's the Jedi way. The Dead Rising franchise is one of the more interesting franchises out there. The franchise of course started off really well with the original 3 games, then getting worse with each entry and update, causing the company that made the Dead Rising franchise shut down. After they released the first Dead Rising game, Capcom outsourced to a company called Blue Castle Games, and they would hold the helm of the Dead Rising franchise. While that was worrisome at first because the original studio who did the first Dead Rising really nailed the atmosphere, I have to say Blue Castle Games knocked it out of the park when it came to Dead Rising 2, their first attempt. So everyone who is a fan of Blue Castle Games now, also known as Capcom Vancouver, which is what I'll be calling it for the rest of this video, it was nothing but uphill from here. However, we know that when they released Dead Rising 3, it was lukewarm at best. The reception wasn't as great as Dead Rising 2. A lot of people like Dead Rising 3. I'm not one of those people. There's just something about Dead Rising 3 that just really drives me away from it. I just can't get into the game, and I absolutely dislike Nick as a character in this franchise. Well, anyway, if Dead Rising 3 was the coffin for the franchise, then Dead Rising 4 was the nails and the shovel that buried it. Yeah, Dead Rising 4 really isn't that good. Don't get me wrong, when this game first came out, I was so ecstatic. I was a huge Dead Rising fan. Frank West was back, this was set in Willamette again. It was Christmas time now. If you don't know me and you don't know anything about this channel, I am a huge sucker for Christmas aesthetic. I just love it so much. So Dead Rising 4 was already getting points from me before I've even played it. And you know what? No matter what people say about this game, I love the Christmas aesthetic. So through my opinion, no matter how bad it is, no matter how bad my experience was, this will always be at least a 1 out of 10 because that Christmas aesthetic just fucking kills it. And actually they do a good job at decorating the town in Dead Rising 4 with the Christmas aesthetic. So, good for that. Anyway, tangent aside, I did play it, I did beat it, and I even paid for the DLC for Frank Rising. And I have to say, it was a bit underwhelming. This game left me meh at best. When I first played it, I was having fun. I honestly don't know what I saw in it. This game really feels lifeless. And, sometimes during Christmas time, I might boot it back up just because I like the aesthetic and I like video games taking place during Christmas time. And I have to say that at least it does that well. Well, after Dead Rising 4 released to not so well reviews, it actually ended up shutting down the studio behind it. Yeah, Capcom shut down Capcom Vancouver, and the Dead Rising franchise was dead, right there in the water. Well, however, behind the scenes at Capcom Vancouver, it turns out that there was a Dead Rising 5 being worked on before the shutdown, although not much at this present time was known about it when these rumors started floating around. Flash forward a couple years and slowly more and more started being revealed on what this title was supposed to be like. Like all the way up until last week of filming this video, we actually have what appears to be Dead Rising 5 footage. It's in a very early state, but this is still very cool to see nonetheless. So a technical level designer portfolio was found, and inside of that portfolio was footage of what Dead Rising 5 was. Well, at least the work that he put into it, that this is what this portfolio was going over. I'm assuming the guy was putting this together to look for other jobs. It's actually kind of an interesting read, and if you're interested at all in any of the portfolio stuff or reading more about this Dead Rising 5 build, then I recommend you giving it a read. I'll have the link to it in the description down below if you are interested. But yes, this portfolio had a copy of Dead Rising 5, not a playable one, but we have footage of what Dead Rising 5 in an early state looked like. Now for this show, I normally play the build and then I talk about it, but I'll make an exception here because there's really no physical way for me to play Dead Rising 5 because it was only just videos in the portfolio. So we have 6 videos here of work that this guy put in on Dead Rising 5. Now we're going to start small to the little technical stuff that I don't know anything about, to the more big stuff that people would normally come to see these leaked videos about. Some of these videos just show some debugging and level work that this guy worked on, like this hotel, or the Barrio District versions 1 and 2. There's also very rough footage of the loot container system. This video basically shows off how easier the looting can be on the memory. In previous Dead Rising titles, loot was strewn all over the ground, making it difficult to tell what was important or useful. It was also extremely taxing on the resources rendering it all out. This was my proposed solution: a loot container system that would allow us to contextualize different drops, clean up the environment, and free up some memory. Like I said, all that stuff was pretty small, but this is probably the biggest part of all of this footage: the actual gameplay that people come to see. And we actually do have gameplay of an early build of what was called the camps. In this footage, you see a lot of what the game was roughly going to look like and play like. Apparently, this is an early build of a jungle level that they had at one point. Tons of zombies to kill, survivors to talk to, and psychos to kill as well. Looking at the gameplay, the maneuverability looks to be way better than Dead Rising 4. With more polish, I can't help but think that this would have been actually fun to play. I really like how the camera zooms out when Chuck is running around, and what's really cool is that this footage actually caps off with a boss fight. I'm sure this level was just to show off what the designer was capable of doing. An early prototype of the jungle level with plenty of zombies to kill, and several gang bases to raid leading up to a final boss. I also created the fence spawners, bush spawners, and trunk spawner tech for this level. The El Guapo boss fight was in the early phases, but you get the idea. Some crazy kind of drug lord with an electrified metallic fake arm. What else do you need to know? Like I said earlier, you're playing as Chuck in his Dead Rising 2 Case Zero outfit? Okay. Maybe this was a prequel to Dead Rising 2, or maybe Chuck was just a placeholder character. Either way, it doesn't really matter, and I don't know. Now, if you're watching the gameplay, you can actually tell in this footage that there is dialogue between characters. So maybe using this dialogue, you can kind of piece together a rough story of at least what the camps was about, and maybe compare that to the leak that came out about Dead Rising 5 story. Yeah, there's a leak that came out that kind of reveals what Dead Rising 5 story was going to be about, but it's a leak, so I really don't trust it. You know, take those with a grain of salt. If you're a Sonic fan, you know what I'm talking about. Sonic Dimensions, anyone? However, one thing I'm leaning toward is that this game might have actually taken place in Mexico. Now, this is a no-brainer thing to think if you actually just read the title. Dead Rising, Dia de los Muertos. I am so sorry if I messed that up. It's a shame that Dead Rising 5 never came to light. If you're a fan of this franchise, you know how heartbreaking it was toward the end of it. Something I have to know, and something I have noted on this channel before, is that I am a massive Sega fan. I love collecting anything Sega related I can get my hands on, that is. I have most of their consoles, a huge portion of their games. I mean, even, oh my god, look behind me right here. Right here is just a fucking shrine to Sonic. So like, I am a huge fan. I'm even decked out in the jacket, you could tell. And Sega decided to give us some really big news. So late last year, Sega came out announcing announcing what their next step in gaming will be. They provided a trailer, and the trailer showed that the answer is that they are reviving a whole bunch of old IPs for the new era of gaming. And some franchises we haven't seen in ages. Sega ages! Crazy Taxi, Golden Axe, Jet Set Radio, Shinobi, and Streets of Rage were all coming back to get brand new games. With the exceptions of Streets of Rage, considering that got a game in 2020, Streets of Rage 4, all these franchises were assumed dead. So it is very exciting that Sega is reviving all these old IPs and bringing out brand new video games. And while this is very exciting news for everyone that is a Sega fan and loves these IPs, there are still franchises out there that are being neglected. And yeah, sure, they might do it down the road if these games are popular, if bringing back old IPs does well for them. I'm sure they will consider doing that for other franchises. But right now, nothing is being said about Rystar, Kid Chameleon, Echo the Dolphin, and today's topic, Vectorman. Now, as a kid, I grew up playing a lot of Sega Genesis games, mostly from those Sega Genesis collections on other consoles. And a game that is in almost every single one of those collections, if not all to my knowledge, is Vectorman. Vectorman has to be up there in my top 10 of Sega Genesis games. This game is just like really good. Vectorman is a 2D platformer developed by Blue Sky Software and was released in 1995. And actually, for the time, Vectorman came out to critical and commercial success. The gameplay, while being hard, is still fun and satisfying. The graphics were cutting edge back then and actually considered a rival to Donkey Kong Country, if you can believe it or not, given that game was only released a year earlier. Crazy. Well, after the success of Vectorman, Blue Sky Software quickly decided to jump on a sequel. So a year later, in 1996, we would get Vectorman 2 on the Sega Genesis. That's a bit odd because the 32X and the Sega Saturn were already out in North America at this time, but they still felt the need to stick with the Sega Genesis. Besides being the console most people would have in their home at the time, I don't really see why they did this. We didn't even get a 32X port of Vectorman 2 or a Saturn port, but it did, and you know, who am I to question God? Well, anyway, Vectorman 2 would release, and while it's not as good or successful as Vectorman 1 was, I still would consider this a very worthy follow-up. Vectorman here still feels as good as he did before. The levels are just as hard as they were in the first one. Maybe harder, I don't know. I remember Vectorman 2 kicking my ass a lot. However, Vectorman 2, still a good time. So while Vectorman and its sequel were both reviewed very well for the time, it would only make sense for someone, Blue Sky Software or another developer, to jump on a third one. And this is where it starts to get a little muddy. So it turns out that there was going to be a Vectorman 3, however, very little information is known on it. All we know is that there were multiple attempts to get Vectorman 3 off the ground, but every pitch made to Sega was shut down. And for years, that is all we would know about Vectorman 3, until recently. So here in the past week, an article has came out over the canceled Vectorman 3 and its extensive development, going under the name Vectorman 3.14, and it was going to be released on the PS2. And with this article releasing, a plethora of information has came out on the development, and I gotta be honest with you, covering all of it and going into it is a bit overwhelming. Just so much information has piled up over the years, and the floodgates just opened. But not only does this article contain information about the development of Vectorman 3, it also comes with playable builds of Vectorman 3. Yes, playable builds. Builds, as in plural. And I'm not just talking about 2, I'm not just talking about 3, I'm talking 11 builds. Vectorman 3 actually has 3 prototypes, and there are 11 builds over the 3 prototypes. That is just insane. Now, I'm not going to go over all the builds. I feel some builds don't really add much to the game or the development, like not a lot was added to it. So we're only going to cover the ones I really think made a big impact and that matter. But before we actually get into the playable builds, I do want to mention something real quick, is that there was a 4th attempt for Vectorman. Kind of. This is actually the first attempt ever to make a Vectorman 3, and it was actually going to be a Vectorman 3 game on the Sega Saturn. Now, either not much is really known about this build, or they just quickly scrapped it to move on to better hardware, but we do actually have 2 concept artworks of Vectorman 3, and a kind of an idea and a sneak peek of what that might have been for the Sega Saturn. Very cool. Well, anyway, that's enough of that. Let's move on to the actual thing. So the company that was building these Vectorman builds was actually not Blue Sky Software. Actually, think they might have been employees from Blue Sky Software that worked on Vectorman 3, but this company is going under the name Pseudo Interactive. So like I said, there are 3 different kind of prototypes here for Vectorman 3. You have a traditional 3D platformer, then a third-person shooter, and then the final prototype is known as the Halo prototype. So the first build of the first prototype starts out like a normal 3D platformer. You'll actually find out in this first build that it's treated like a twin-stick shooter. It really feels awkward and unnatural to control, and Vectorman just looks weird flipping all around the place. However, I do have to say the fast-paced nature is one of my favorite things about the first build of this prototype because it only shows up in this one. Playing as Vectorman, shooting and flying all around feels satisfying for the most part. It's a little broken and I don't think it was properly balanced. However, it's a first build of a first prototype, so I don't think much balance went into anything. But with a little bit more time, this could have been something pretty special. As we flash forward to the final build of this prototype, and as you can see that it is miles better than the first build we have. Vectorman actually looks like there's solid physics to him, and it's really nice. This to me feels like if they brought the Genesis game to 3D. And I feel like companies have a hard time nailing that down, but really here in Vectorman 3, they really nailed the feeling of it. This one has a power-up that turns you into a spider. It's a pretty neat idea to play around with, and the mechanics aren't too bad either. Taking a mechanic from the Genesis games and adding it into 3D is pretty cool. And whoa, this prototype actually ends on a boss fight. And it's not bad. I ran out of bullets on the final build and soft locked myself, but other than that, this was pretty decent. It's a good prototype and a good version of a Vectorman in 3D. Also, just something I thought would be funny to mention is that this also wouldn't be a bad Iron Man game either. If they could just, turn Vectorman into Iron Man, you pretty much would have your Iron Man game right there. I think this one happened to be my favorite prototype out of the bunch that we're going to cover. I'm just going to spoil that right now. However, Sega didn't really have the same enthusiasm as I did, and that's why they canceled the build. I saw the potential here. This should have been Vectorman's true jump to 3D. If you actually compare this to the first build of the prototype to the final build of the prototype, you can see a lot of improvement was made, and you can see what the team was going for and what they wanted to do. But like I said, Sega wasn't interested in it and they axed it, leaving Pseudo to go back to the drawing board. And that's where our second prototype comes in, the third-person shooter. So right off the bat, you'll see the camera has changed. This time around, Pseudo decided going in and making a third-person shooter. The camera is locked behind Vectorman, so you won't have the freedom as you did like in the last prototype. And just like the last prototype, it's only one level just to give you a little taste of what Pseudo's second attempt would have played like. Now, as odd as a concept is as a third-person shooter for Vectorman, I can actually see this angle kind of working, and I wouldn't have mind seeing a Vectorman third-person shooter either if done in this fashion. So both builds of this prototype start out with you having to pick up your weapons, or data chips as they're called, and once you do so, a door will open and you just go wreak havoc. Now the jump in all builds of this prototype just don't feel right. The last prototype nailed how the jumping and the floating should be in the 3D space, and this game just kind of fumbled the ball a little bit. But running around and shooting still feels pretty nice, and it has an auto lock on aim when shooting, which is very helpful because you're gonna need it. To get ammo in this prototype, kill an enemy, absorb them, bada boom, bada bing. I want to say graphically, this looks pretty decent too. It was a bit of a gameplay change, and not my idea of a Vectorman 3D, but an angle I still could have respected and played and got used to. However, same as last time, Sega didn't see the potential in it, and they axed it. But Pseudo wasn't done yet. They decided to go back to the drawing board one last time and give us the prototype build known as the Halo prototype. Halo was really popular in the early 2000s, and as this prototype was coming out, Halo 2 was right around the corner. And the hype for Halo 2 was out of this world. So since Halo was being popular, the Pseudo team took a note from it and decided to turn Vectorman into a war third-person shooter known as the Halo build. And as soon as I booted up, you can see why right off the bat people claimed it as such. They tried to go for this Gears of War Halo theme, and yeesh, I did not like this one at all. It just feels generic. This was made in the early 2000s, of the time where the edge is so sharp it'll cut you. See, in the early 2000s, it was a trend to be edgy, darker, and gritty, so a lot of these franchises like Vectorman were going to get the same treatment. That's why it's known as the Halo build. Another franchise got turned into this, and it didn't end well. Bomberman Act Zero, anyone? This prototype is the farthest from Vectorman it has ever been. I can understand what they were going for, but this just wasn't it, Chief. Bland gameplay, bland graphics, and just rough all around. And if you want to get on me for blaming a prototype for being bad, nah, I just complimented those other two prototypes, and those were perfectly fine. This prototype? No, not for me, no thanks. It feels like a last option, I'm gonna be honest. Sega wasn't picking up anything that made Vectorman what it was, so why not go all out in this Halo style, you know? Try to get some of the thing that was popular, the trend of the time. Anyway, I got lost in this prototype, ran out of bullets, and just didn't know what to do, so I turned it off. However, we do have a final build of the Halo prototype, and this one right here is the final build of any Vectorman 3 game. This is the last build right here, so let's see how it is. And yeah, they made it darker and grittier than the last build. Vectorman is unrecognizable in this build as well. He loses his signature green for black. And while I do actually like this design, it's not Vectorman. I'm really baffled at this too because nothing here screams Vectorman to me. And honestly, it's just not fun. It's not the build, it's clearly had a lot of work done on it, but it's not Vectorman. The only thing making it Vectorman is the title and the photons from the Genesis games. The first two prototypes were onto something. That is what Vectorman 3D should have been. The only thing good about these builds is that they have a grappling hook in them. And I fucking love grappling hooks. I love swinging all around. And if that would have gotten fleshed out, that probably would have been the best part of Vectorman 3.4 if we got that one, 3.14. Damn. And as cold as it sounds, I'm actually glad Sega canceled this game. I would have canceled this game. Some people got together and made PS2 covers of what this Vectorman game would have looked like. So it's also really neat that we also get covers to the game as well. I thought that was just really cool. But I mean, look at this cover. Oh my god. The Edge. In terms of first-person shooters, there's no other franchise that dominates quite like the Call of Duty franchise. With over 20 titles in the main series, it's safe to say that Call of Duty is a force to be reckoned with. And the Xbox 360 era / PS3 era happens to be the peak of Call of Duty in my opinion. I mean, it's obvious, proof is in the pudding. We got games like COD 4, World at War, Modern Warfare 2, Black Ops 1, Modern Warfare 3, Black Ops 2. The GOAT! However, after Black Ops 2, we got a game called Call of Duty Ghosts, which I know a lot of you know since it was the game right after. And while I have a soft spot for Call of Duty Ghosts, I know a lot of people don't like this title very much. But what if I told you that a whole other Call of Duty game was supposed to come out instead of Call of Duty Ghosts? Today we're going to be talking about a canceled Call of Duty game, Call of Duty Future Warfare. Now there's actually quite a lot of bit to dive in here. It's a pretty loaded build. And the people who developed this build will be Neversoft, the people who make the Tony Hawk and Guitar Hero games. That's an interesting pick. So like I've done before on this show, we're going to start with the small stuff about this build all the way to the big juicy stuff of the build that you guys come to see. We have to give recognition to every little aspect of this build because it all deserves it. Or at least what I find interesting. So when you do start up this build, you're launched right into a title screen with a title of NX1. Now I don't know if this takes a rocket scientist to figure it out, but I think that NX1 personally stands for Next One. I haven't really seen a Call of Duty video or anybody in the Call of Duty community saying that or claiming that. Maybe I'm just blind and somebody's like, oh, I did that, but I don't know. But yeah, I think it means Next One. And when you get past it and go into the actual menu, I was very surprised to hear that there's actual menu music here. And it's your standard COD Forte. However, if we can take a glance at the menu screen alone, we can see things are looking pretty familiar here. So yeah, it just looks like they just reskinned the Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3 main menus. So you know we have our standard fare here with Spec Ops campaign and multiplayer. And I think we should start with Spec Ops. mostly because we can't start with Spec Ops. Yeah, so the menu works, and every little thing about the menus work. You can go into a level, select what difficulty you want, it's all there, but unfortunately when you try to select any of these levels, the game will just crash on you. Believe me, I did try many missions, that's why I know, and it just kept crashing over and over and over again. I just got tired of it. So to my knowledge, I think every single of these Spec Op missions aren't playable. That's a real shame too, because I want to play. I mean, I want to play this Call of Duty game. But at least we can look at the picture and know the titles of what each mission was going to be, and I guess we can take that with us. But unlike Spec Ops, campaign actually does work here. Well, 5 playable levels, that is. Yes, I got 5 levels of the campaign to work for me, and the amount of detail that went into this campaign is insane. Fully scripted segments, mid-gameplay cutscenes, voice acting, a narrative I can't follow, but hey, at least there is one. The amount of detail here actually really took me back, considering that this is an early build. Most early builds don't put this much detail and effort into it. They try to just mainly get the grand scope across. However, this Call of Duty game, you can definitely tell that this was in development to be the next one, because they were going all out with the detail around the levels. Which the ones that I got working were Border, Visiting Hours, Into the Fire, Descent, and Moonbase Assault. First is Border, a level where you fight your way literally through a border, and then into the city with the objective to take out the Resistance. It's a pretty competent stage actually. It's your standard Call of Duty fare though. You start at one point and make your way to the end. Not much really goes on here but a bunch of gunfights. Visiting Hours, the next stage, has you locating a target while stealthily taking out the enemies inside of a hospital. There's some pretty fun gunfights here, like when you take it outdoors to the roof. Into the Fire is the third level here, and it has you running down the streets of Indonesia, lighting up any enemy that gets in your way. This one is really thrilling. Running through the town is actually a lot of fun. The map is well detailed and full of paths for you to run down and a lot of things for you to hide behind for cover. Now that was the first 3 levels of this build, and that happens to be the most polished that this campaign gets. After Into the Fire, there is another level, but it's unplayable, so we have to skip right over it to the next mission, which is Descent. Descent is where we finally get a taste of that future warfare that the game's title has. It's our first future level of the campaign, and it has you get on a tram car fighting enemies off of a nearby train. After doing so and making it into a building, you're tossed out of it into space where you run and gun all the way down to the next train to then leave the space area. It's a decent mission, but I kept falling off of the tram in the beginning of the level. I guess the collision just wasn't fully implemented there, so if you're gonna play this, be careful of that. However, it was really cool to finally see a future weapon in this campaign. Through the campaign so far, we've been using just previous old Modern Warfare weapons, but now we finally have these 2 new guns, and they look pretty nice. I can imagine with more polish this would be even more fun to play with, but for what it is, it's really not bad. Now we're on to the last playable mission for me, is Moonbase Assault. This one happens to be my favorite one so far. So Moonbase Assault, or the High Ground as it's calling itself now, starts off so fucking hardcore. Waking up passed out on the moon, seeing all your companions around you die to the bullets piercing their suits, it's so dark and grim. Like, this dude literally helps you up and immediately gets murked. Like, god damn! And watching your helmet crack due to your suit and helmet almost giving into the pressure of space adds a lot of tension to the gameplay. It's a really nice touch. The main objective of this stage is to make it to the armory and kill, again, anybody that steps up to you. A great level to play through, and we do get more of that future tech, so that's fun. And that's all I was pretty much able to play of the campaign. While every single level is completable, a lot of them would crash on me, and I was only able to complete maybe like 1 or 2. But that doesn't matter, because I had a blast playing all these levels, especially Moonbase Assault. I mean, it's literally gunfighting on the moon. The coolest shit ever. Now, I do want to point out that the gunplay here is actually pretty solid. Of course, they're just recycling the gunplay from Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3, but hey, why fix what's not broken? And while I was able to play all these levels that I did show off, I wasn't really able to complete every single one of them. No, most of them would crash before I got right to the end, but some of them were playable all the way to the end, and I did finish those. But again, I am just impressed with the amount of effort and detail that went into this campaign. I mean, there's like an hour's worth of content here. And there is actually a story in these campaign levels. Now, I can't really follow the narrative, but I'm sure someone out there could, and they'll piece together what little information we have here, and I would love to watch a YouTube video on that, please make that. Well, so we went through Spec Ops, which was nothing, and what we could of the campaign. That just leaves multiplayer. And oh my god, it seems like a lot of the focus went to the multiplayer as well. It seems like Spec Ops was an afterthought. They got their team to come up with ideas for missions, and they just didn't get to work on those. But multiplayer is in a good stage to look at, and I'm glad it is that way, so we can actually look at what Call of Duty Future Warfare multiplayer would have been. Now, there were like 28 maps to go through. This would have been easily the biggest Call of Duty game to come out on the Xbox 360. There are a ton of original maps. We even got some legacy maps from old Modern Warfare games. There are just a ton to pick through here. And I don't want to make this video go on forever, although I'm sure some of you wouldn't mind that, but I did not play every single multiplayer mission. I'm a busy guy, I got stuff to do, but I did run through quite a handful of them. And I'm going to repeat myself here, but I am just blown away with the amount of effort and detail that went into these multiplayer maps for a game that wasn't even out yet. And I know it's like, no duh, it's an early build, but I'm thinking that Activision went in, saw all the work that Neversoft did on this game, and just went, nah, scrap it, we don't need any of that. Because the multiplayer is actually kind of fleshed out here. One thing I do love when you're picking a map, you can see what stages the maps were in that the developers left off on, and it was just like a cute little note that they gave to each other. I'm sure just to let the developing team know what stage the map was at. But yeah, it's pretty much just more of that multiplayer Modern Warfare fun. We had a ton of it in Modern Warfare 2 and 3, and this was just going to be the next entry in that. And you know, that's actually kind of funny, because I do remember growing up, back when Modern Warfare 3 came out, after Treyarch's next game, we all thought Modern Warfare 4 was going to come out. And by playing this build some kind of way, some kind of feeling, I get that. And so when I play this build, that's all I can pretty much think about is, oh my god, this is the lost Modern Warfare 4 we never got. Because in the beginning of the campaign, it really doesn't start with the future stuff yet. It's pretty much almost a continuation of Modern Warfare 3, just set a little bit later with a different character. But anyway, back to the multiplayer. The multiplayer here, I can imagine being really fun. Now, there was this weird maneuver that if you looked at a car, that's when you did a slide or a dolphin dive. There was no dedicated button for that, but it was kind of interesting that they were toying around with a slide and dolphin dive in a Modern Warfare title. I really do like that. However, it only works on cars and tires for some reason. I don't know why, but every time I look at a tire, I would do a slide or a dive. I actually managed to pull off a glitch in a couple maps where I would aim at a tire and it would just launch me 100 feet up in the air and I would slowly fall down and die. But yeah, the multiplayer here is actually pretty decent. Not only can you play the multiplayer, but you can actually customize your profile to a certain degree. You got emblems and calling cards that you can adjust. Of course, your boy had to go with the Wii one. You know, hot command, we on command. You know how it be.
Mission accomplished. Good work.
Now, not only is this game playable by yourself, but you can actually hook it up and get split screen working on here. There's videos up on YouTube. I wasn't able to get this pulled off myself, but hey, that's pretty cool. Not only that, but people have managed to find a way to play this on the Xbox 360 itself, so you can actually get that authentic COD game experience, and found a way to play it online with people. Truly, when the COD community wants to put their heads together, they're going to do so. The Halo series is a series that needs no introduction at all. Revolutionizing the first-person shooter genre since the inception, Halo, it's safe to say, is a mainstay. But just like any good company, throughout Halo's lifetime, there have been many canceled games in the Halo franchise. And today, we'll be discussing one of those games. We're going to be discussing the time that Megablox and Halo teamed up together to make a Megablox Halo game. Now, quite frankly, I am not really all that familiar with the Halo games. I mean, I played the first two Halo games, and I love the first two Halo games. But when we get into the Xbox 360 era, that's where things get a little rocky for me. Now, while I do own a handful of Halo games, I'm actually not the biggest fan of the series. Now, it's a fine first-person shooter, I just didn't grow up this route. I was more of a Call of Duty kid growing up. But just because I did not play the Halo games all that much doesn't mean that I don't respect the franchise. I very much do. It is a solid franchise. And oh my god, never mind the first two. If you were on the Xbox 360, Halo, you could not escape it. It was everywhere and it was peak gaming. Well, during the Halo mania of the Xbox 360 era, in 2013, a side game was being worked on called Project Haggard. Now, for what is actually in this build, is pretty impressive actually. The graphics for an early build look near complete. The stage's atmosphere is completely fleshed out and they nailed the Halo art style here. No, like seriously, I love how this game looks. The colors pop out, the lighting's pretty good. A lot more detail than you usually find in some of these early builds. Now I have played the Halo games, so playing a Halo game in the third person is it's a little new and a little weird. Yes, we have a third-person shooter here, and it feels pretty damn good to control. You have your normal Halo gun that you start out with, the normal Halo assault rifle, but you can also find needlers and other guns from the Halo universe in this build, and they're all fun to use. There's a lock-on when you start shooting people, so being able to run around the map with the lock-on and shooting, you feel like a tank, and it feels pretty good. We play as Master Chief, taking on grunts and elites like in the normal Halo games. Going through this vast level, and around this level you'll actually find Megablox studs lying around, kind of like how they are in the Lego games. Killing grunts and elites will also give you a burst of studs. A bit into the level, we can come across some of the building mechanics they had in mind. It's a pretty simple mechanic, however it's still fun to play around with. You start by building this bridge, and while it is pretty simple, if they could have expanded upon this, I imagine the building here could have been something pretty special. The blueprint layout, in my opinion, makes it to where I think they could have done anything they wanted with this, and it does get the creative juices flowing. Master Chief also has this jetpack jump, which I constantly used and maybe got a little carried away with it sometimes, you know, whoops. But combine that with the actual decent lock-on feature with the shooting, then I'm a jumping shooting machine and it feels so fucking cool to play. Later on you get to this wave segment where it starts to show off how the game was going to take its humor. We get a cutscene showing an elite kicking a grunt off an airship, and I love that. It seems like this was just going to take a lighthearted jab at the franchise, kind of like how the Lego games do. And I do think Halo could have pulled it off with its universe and characters. So the wave here is pretty fun actually. Jumping around, locking onto enemies, shooting, it feels pretty awesome and you do feel like you're in control. And after fighting off that wave, this giant alien shows up, and I think this is where my Halo knowledge starts to get a little rocky, because I don't remember seeing this alien in any of the games. Let me know in the comments down below if he shows up. But anyway, this alien jumps down acting as the boss that you would have to fight, and here's where more of the building mechanic actually starts to kick in from earlier when we were building the bridge. Now we can build up turrets to help fight off the boss. I don't think they fully worked properly for me, but it's still just cool that this idea was floating around. However, it's when we defeat the boss I started having problems with my build of the game. The game kept freezing and crashing, so I was actually never able to get past this area, so I don't know what's actually next. I get to the Warthog area and the game would go on this freezing binge, and I booted this game up like 3 or 4 times, and you have to run through the entirety of the level again. You can't just boot up where your last checkpoint was. So I played this full build like 4 or 5 times just to get back to that point, and every time it just kept crashing on me. But thanks to footage online, I am now able to know that there is a second level that is playable in this build. While it does look pretty early and pretty rough, it's still just cool that a second level exists, and unfortunate that I wasn't able to experience it. But all this is crazy to me because, as many of you know, is that Megablox and Halo actually teamed up before, and Megablox sells a bunch of Halo figures. And their partnership has been pretty strong throughout the years, releasing set after set. So the idea that Megablox and Halo come together to make a video game would have been pretty cool. To my knowledge, I don't think there's any major Megablox games out there, so this Halo game could have been a step in the right direction. But unfortunately, we weren't on that timeline. It's said that this build had roughly 10 months of work put into it, and that is just insane for a build like this. The first level is like near complete, and if they would have picked this up, I'm sure just a few more tweaks would have happened to it, but the first level would have been the first level, I think. And that's just wild that they just put so much effort and detail into this one little level for just to show what they had in mind. I guess go big or go home, right? I think Microsoft passing up on this Halo game was a bit of a mistake on their part. This is a cute little side spin-off Halo game, and I think if they just uploaded it to the Xbox 360 marketplace, if they didn't feel comfortable with giving it a AAA disc release, then the Xbox 360 marketplace would have been perfect for this. Or the Xbox One marketplace, whatever one, you know. You don't charge full price for like 20-40 bucks, and I guarantee you this would have sold pretty well. And Megablox Megablox could have pulled more of their IPs into video games and could have had their start on the video game market, kind of just like how Lego does. The whole timeline and possibilities that Megablox could have had right here is wild. At the end of the day, at least I can say it was nice to get a little glimpse, a little peek into the world of what a Megablox Halo game would have been and what a Megablox game would have been like in general. I do feel if Megablox would have made this game, if Halo would have made this game, and Microsoft, if 3, anyone, if they would have made this game, that it actually would have been pretty competent on its own and it would have done pretty well. But it is what it is at the end of the day. Projects come and go, things get canceled for multiple reasons. We're not sure why, they just do. And I have to feel bad a little bit for the Halo fans because this is just another one of those games that they unfortunately missed out on.